Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. Here's a brief recap of what we covered in the last episode. Even though a lot of millennials, like myself, tend to call The Muppet Christmas Carol as the first time they were introduced to the classic Charles Dickens story, I first saw it with Mickey's Christmas Carol. The version I watched was a recording of an airing on NBC that my grandparents had. I was either 4 or 5, but I remember liking it a lot. I was already aware of who Scrooge McDuck was from the DuckTales TV show. I felt that because the special was an excellent balance of spooky atmosphere and a Merry Christmas tone, this made it one of the few adaptations to feel very close to the novella. When I saw it again as an adult, it both still held up really well and felt it was better than the 2009 Disney feature starring Jim Carrey. Despite that, even though it was Disney characters playing each Dickinson part, they were all casted right. The combination of great voice acting and grand animation showed that Disney still had a lot to offer in 1983, as most people at the time had thought that the company could close. There had not been a new theatrical Mickey Mouse cartoon since 1953 with The Simple Things. By 1953, most of the film industry was exiting theatrical animation due to the high costs and the competition from television. Though the Disney company was still churning out hits like Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, and Sleeping Beauty, Walt Disney had taken a back seat to the studio's animation division. His attention was on the upcoming Disneyland resort that would open in 1955. For the time being, the animated movies were still being drawn by the classic 9 Old Men. "1953 was also the year a young artist named Burny would begin his career at Disney, first being hired in the traffic department, which was another term for mail delivery. He used that to his advantage to meet and mingle with studio artists to get an idea on what the company's hierarchy was like. He discovered that only the 9 Old Men were allowed to do full animation, and at best, people could hope to eventually become their assistants. Burny would eventually be hired as an in-betweener, which was someone who drew intermediate frames that went in between key frames of character animation, making the movement more smooth. In-betweeners were also seen as the lowest on the Disney chain of animation. He first worked under Mark Davis, and then for Eric Larson, who were some of the 9 Old Men. Burny worked on a variety of projects with Eric over the next 15 years. By the time he was finally given a promotion to character animation on Robin Hood, the Disney company was in a different place, with Walt Disney gone and the studio lacking direction. In 1977, he was given another promotion to do storyboarding on The Rescuers. Storyboarding is seen as the closest to directing, as they pretty much map out where the camera is, where the characters are positioned, and even how the color palette will set the visual tone of the movie. He enjoyed the work on The Rescuers and Fox and the Hound, but was experiencing a lot of trouble when tasked with The Black Cauldron. He eventually left in favor to work on his first project, an all-new Mickey Mouse cartoon. He listened to the 1974 Disney record of an adaptation of Dickens' Christmas Carol and thought it had potential as a short film. The record was written, produced, and starred Mr. Ed actor Alan Young, where he played a variety of characters, including Scrooge McDuck for the first time. Burny sent a pitch, along with the record, to Disney CEO Ron Miller, who called him up to his office the next day. He first pranked Burny by faking being angry and then approving of him working on storyboarding. 2 weeks later, Ron Miller saw the charcoal-drawn storyboards of Scrooge McDuck as Ebenezer walking down a dreary London. The project was given a full green light, and Burny was told to gather a team to have preliminary work and voiceover acting finished by May to start animation. So, what was animating like under Burny Mattinson? How was each Disney character selected for their roles? Why wasn't it expanded into a feature-length story when given the chance? And why does it remain a classic even when it's almost 40 years old? Let's grab our pen and ink and sketch an idea. This is part 2 of the story of Mickey's Christmas Carol. Though Burny knew he was primarily adapting the story adaptation of the 1974 record, he figured that nothing was off the table with what they could do. The first person he recruited was Don Griffith as the movie's art director. Along with Burny, they started to create more concept art to get an idea on how to properly mix Mickey Mouse and the gang into A Christmas Carol. In short time, they had also brought on Tim O'Donnell as the assistant director, Mark Henn, a character animator who was a favorite of Burny, Michael Peraza, a layout artist, and Burny's wife Sylvia. They would listen to the record and reread parts of the novella as they continued on concept art, using the charcoal storyboards as a guiding point. Yes, they already had the sequence of Scrooge walking in London as a beginning, but they knew it was important to pick the overall style for the short. It eventually came down to 2. The first was from Don Griffin, whose Xerox clean line style was first used in 101 Dalmatians. But thanks to better technology and better people to smooth out the lines, it had vastly improved on the sketch style. This would also result in characters popping out more against the backgrounds. The second style was from Michael Peraza, who wanted a more whimsical look that incorporated brighter watercolors similar to Alice in Wonderland. The vote was unanimously in Don Griffin's look. More crew were brought in that included Ed Gombart, who was a jack of all trades who was talented in all aspects of animation, Dale Barr, who was said to be a genius with a pencil, and Glenn Keane, a legend who was mentored by Ollie Johnson and was also the son of Bill Keane, who created the comic strip Family Circus. Sylvia was responsible for overseeing and bringing in the needed assistance, which proved to be difficult as various artists were swamped with work on the Black Cauldron and the upcoming Tokyo Disneyland Resort. They would eventually bring on Matt O'Callahan, Toby Shelton, Dave Block, and then unknown John Lasseter to do character animation, each given model sheets of the corresponding characters assigned. But many were also more than happy to act out the scenes like a good old-fashioned rehearsal. To quote Burny, "Animators are a lot like actors and need to be casted accordingly." End quote. Of course, they also had to decide if everyone on the original record was right for their parts. They were already keen on using Scrooge McDuck, Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy, and Willie the Giant playing the same parts. But when they got the visual idea of Merlin playing the Ghost of Christmas Past and the Wicked Queen in her hag form as the Ghost of Christmas Future, they knew it wouldn't work since everyone else was part animal. For the sake of not thinking about it too hard, let's just say that Willie being a giant is enough to justify him fitting into the story. It just so happens that a human wizard and a witch was where the line was drawn. They would select Jiminy Cricket to replace Merlin, as him previously being a conscience for Pinocchio would make him more suited to remind Scrooge of his original innocence before greed took over.
Well, it's about time. Haven't got all night, you know.
Who are you?
Why, I'm the Ghost of Christmas Past.
Oh, I thought you'd be taller.
Listen, Scrooge, if men were measured by kindness, you'd be no bigger than a speck of dust.
Kindness is of little use in this world.
You didn't always think so. Come on, Scrooge, it's time to go.
Then go.
They also felt that the contrasting size difference of Jiminy and Willie would create a more interesting visual aesthetic. Pete was selected to replace the Queen, this time more as a physical opposite than mental. Scrooge needed to encounter someone who was about to bring him into the darkest of Christmas visions and to give him his biggest fear, an empty death. While Pete is typically more suited to be Mickey's enemy rather than Donald or Scrooge's, his gruff personality as a bully would become effective for Scrooge's biggest nightmare. Another noticeable replacement were both of the charity collectors. In the original record, they were oddly played by Honest John Foulfellow and Gideon, the fox and the cat from Pinocchio. Why they initially thought two con artists playing these two guys was a good idea, I have no idea. Otherwise, the original record played out very similar to the eventual scene in the movie.
Ah, customers. I'll handle this, Cratchit. Yes, what can I do for you two gentlemen?
Mr. Marley?
No, I'm Mr. Scrooge, but no matter. What is it you want?
Sir, we are soliciting funds for the indigent and destitute.
For the what?
We're collecting for the poor.
Oh, and you want me to give you money for the poor?
Yes, sir. Why, here in London, there are thousands of poor people for whom we must raise money.
Now, let me see. Do you do this all year long?
Oh, my, yes. It's a big job raising money for the poor.
Ah, then this is your job, raising money for the poor.
Yes, Mr. Scrooge.
Well, you realize if you give money to the poor, then they won't be poor anymore, will they?
Well,
And if they're not poor anymore, then you won't have to raise money for them anymore.
well, I suppose.
And if you don't have to raise money for them anymore, then you would be put out of a job. And on Christmas Eve, oh, please, gentlemen, don't ask me to put you out of a job. Not on Christmas Eve.
Oh, we wouldn't do that, Mr. Scrooge.
All right, both of you, out! And take your pot and your pennies for the poor with you.
Fezziwig was casted with Mr. Toad in a silent cameo, so they ended up using Ratty and Molly for the charity collectors instead. It's interesting they used a lot of characters from the Mr. Toad short, even though it's not that well known of a movie today, except of course for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. While work was being done to completing the storyboarding, they got to work on casting, which involved a lot more work than you'd realize. Even though many would assume that Disney could simply pick up the phone and get their studio talent to record anything, that wasn't the case, at least in 1983. Like I said, Mickey hadn't been used in a short since The Simple Things, but the other members of the Fab Five, Mickey, Donald, Goofy, and Pluto, were also not seen or even used as much as before. They'd have their faces on toys and commercials every once in a while, but Disney had always given permission to let those businesses hire whoever they wanted. Since this was supposed to be a big comeback, things were now different. When it came to Scrooge McDuck, I ended up getting two different stories. According to actor Alan Young, he apparently had to audition. To quote him, "I went home and called the casting director up. I said, 'Hello, it's Alan Young. You're casting for Mickey's Christmas Carol? Why didn't you ask me?'" End quote. According to his side of the story from an interview in 2010, he said he was on the Disney studio lot when an actor was apparently auditioning for Scrooge had asked Alan for help with the Scottish accent. So that was when Alan made the call for a chance to audition. The other story, according to Burny, was that no auditions were held for Scrooge and that Alan Young had always been the first choice. I can't clarify whose story is the truth, but I'm more inclined to believe, especially given how good the Scrooge's actor was on the record, that Alan was always in mind for the part. Perhaps the actor either remembered wrong or was trying to make his story more interesting. In fact, according to Burny, Alan loved telling stories, and at the most, there might have been concern over salary, but signing him on was no issue. Now they had to find a new voice actor for Mickey Mouse. Before, Walt Disney and Jimmy McDonald, a studio Foley artist, played the mouse. But for his big comeback, Burny was keen on bringing in someone who could make his high-pitched voice more natural while bringing more personality to his innocence and optimism. They organized an audition where several hopefuls tried out, but were either too high, too low, or were just a bad imitation of the previous voices. By midday, they had dozens reading from a couple of sequences as the full story was not fully laid out yet. None really clicked. That was until a 26-year-old sound effects editor, Wayne Allwine, came in. He already played Mickey as a lead-in to the new Mickey Mouse Club TV show in 1977. It's one thing to introduce a show. Could he carry a character in a movie? His auditions said yes, as he was casted by the end of the day. What he didn't know yet was that he would be playing Mickey as the official voice until he passed in 2009. Burny wanted to use one of the last surviving voice actors from the beginning, Clarence Nash, as Donald, but he was given orders from the top not to contact him as Clarence had retired even though he had played the part on the record version. The crew brought in some people to audition, but everyone agreed that they all sounded awful. At the time, there was a voiceover who did the Donald Duck orange juice commercials, but they were hated enough that he wasn't even invited to audition. As much as I would have loved to have showcased them, I couldn't track any of them down. At Sylvia's persuasion, Burny made the call to Clarence's wife, and they went over to his home in Burbank. Though Clarence was looking a little tired, he was very enthusiastic about playing Donald again. He had most recently done some records for Donald and was even mentoring Tony Alsamo, who would eventually take over full time. He was casted right there in his home. They would eventually cast Hal Smith as Goofy and Ratty, Will Ryan as Willie, Pete, and Molly, Eddie Carroll as Jiminy Cricket, and Patricia Paris as Daisy, who would be Belle, Scrooge's lost love. By this point, the entire short was fully storyboarded, and they were ready to begin recording. Clarence Nash would be the first to come in. There was some concern that because he was reaching 80, his Donald might sound like it was coming out of an old man. Burny was optimistic, but the horrible thought hit his head that if it wouldn't work, he would have to be the one to fire Donald Duck from playing himself. On that day in early April, Clarence was driven to the studio by his wife, where he walked in with his cane and greeted everyone. As he made his way to the sound booth slowly, everyone followed suit, eager to get a chance to see a Disney legend play a classic character for the first time in a while. By the time he got to the booth, Burny was in there, first offering the old man a chair, which was refused. He was then given the script for a scene when Donald as Fred would invite Scrooge to dinner. Burny both couldn't believe he was directing a legend and felt out of place that he, a much younger man, was giving orders to someone who spent years playing the Duck. Burny went to the recording bay, with most watching Clarence, not knowing what to expect.
Merry Christmas!
And a Merry Christmas to you, Master Fred!
Bah, humbug.
Merry Christmas, Uncle Scrooge!
What's so merry about it? I'll tell you what Christmas is. It's just another work day, and any jackanapes who thinks else should be boiled in his own pudding.
But, sir, Christmas is a time for giving, a time to be with one's family.
I say bah, humbug.
I don't care. I say Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!
Well said, Master Fred.
Cratchit, what are you doing?
I was just trying to keep my hands warm, sir.
Burny's fears quickly disappeared, as a young duck had no problem coming out of a much older body. Everyone sat and enjoyed seeing a bit of the Walt Disney past come to life, as Clarence gave a couple of different takes, all coming out phenomenal, even throwing in a famous Donald Duck tantrum. It would end up as a background noise for a few seconds, but it does add a lot to Donald's persona. Each actor came in to record their parts, and various animators, including Glenn Keane, John Lasseter, Mike Peraza, Mark Henn, Patty Peraza, and Randy Cartwright, did background vocal noise called Walla Wallas in a few of the crowd scenes. By the time they got to May, they had more than enough material ready to showcase. CEO Ron Miller was invited, along with the staff, to the screening room for the first test footage, which consisted of a mix of concept art and pencil sketches, along with a vocal recording to get an idea of what the film was eventually going to be like. They even went as far to use some of Bob Cratchit's scenes to showcase some rudimentary animation. In pencil form, of course. Everyone was surprised by how they were able to cram an entire Dickens story into a 26-minute short. Not only was the production ready to fully animate, Ron then asked an important question. Do you think we should go full length? Burny had to think about it. We'll get to that, but we're going to take a short break.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
Burny never went into Mickey's Christmas Carol with the idea that it could end up as a feature-length story. He always intended it as a classic Mickey Mouse short that could be screened on TV every holiday. But now that the CEO was giving him that option, how tempting was it to make his first project an actual Disney feature? He had some ideas that he was forced to cut, which included Pluto as a pet shop dog that Scrooge would have passed a couple of times on the street, which would have ultimately resulted in Bob receiving him as a gift. Bob's Family Dinner was also meant to be longer and would have included Minnie Mouse having a speaking role. All of that could have been incorporated into a movie. There was a possibility of adding songs. The record itself was a musical. Burny had even stated that his dream project was a feature-length Mickey Mouse movie. So why didn't it happen? What kept the project as a short was that because the story was Christmas-centered, that severely limited the time in which the company could give the movie a re-release. They'd only have November and December, which was much more reserved for the larger projects. Again, this is before home video was a major priority. It wasn't in Disney's financial favor, and Burny agreed. But on the plus side, it was time to finally break out the pen and ink. Along with hundreds, even thousands of concept sketches and storyboards, the team had also turned to the company's two Kens, Ken O'Connor and Ken Anderson. They were art directors who were known for constructing models and miniatures for tons of previous projects. This ranged from simple objects like Cruella's car in 101 Dalmatians or Cinderella's carriage to sets like both the interior and exterior of the Seven Dwarfs cottage in Snow White. What these would do would act as visual aids for the animators and to help stage the scenes and test out various dramatic lighting patterns before they would be drawn. Along with the animators Dick Lucas and Michael Peraza, who were also model makers, they ended up building all the home interiors and of scaled to size characters as they would again act out the dialogue, move each character in place before making the final plans to quote-unquote dress rehearsal everything. Each set and character was available to all animators to borrow in case they needed a reference. Burny even kept the Jiminy Cricket model that was capable of putting a real candle in place, just so that the crew got an idea of how fire would reflect on the Ghost of Christmas Past. Though many of the animation jobs were random, most were assigned if someone wanted the responsibility of a particular character. Mark Henn was Mickey's animator. He used his look from Mickey and the Beanstalk from Fun and Fancy Free, which was seen as both the essential classic Mickey and the style that Disney would primarily use for a while. Mark would end up spending the most time in the archives, bringing up several past designs, seeing that his nose and ears had to be in exact angles in order for a circular design to look good. Glenn Keane was Willie the Giant's animator. Though the character had only been in one movie, Glenn already felt inspired to write a bumbling human, as he had a toddler at home who walked similar and would even model his child into Willie's movement in the city. David Block was Scrooge's animator. He would use a lot of Carl Barks Donald Duck comics, as Scrooge was only used in 2 educational films back in the 60s. He ended up mimicking the movements of Ludwig von Drake to ensure that Scrooge presented himself as more weathered and refined than Donald. Randy Cartwright was Goofy's animator. The character would prove to be more challenging than expected, as this Jacob Marley needed to be both spooky and still have the clumsy demeanor of Goofy. Because the normally dark scene was a lot lighter, the atmosphere of the previous sequence of Scrooge walking home would help bring him into a ghost story sooner. Ed Gombert would be the animator for Donald, Molly, and Ratty. Though I had a hard time finding out who worked on who, many of the previous animators I mentioned before, including Matthew O'Callaghan, Retta Davidson, Walt Stachfield, Toby Shelton, and John Lasseter, had all done various animation from background layout to even entire sequences. John Lasseter was even the one who worked on Scrooge and Jiminy flying over London and came up with the idea of Scrooge trying to climb on top of a small umbrella. Production continued smoothly as Burny wanted to ensure an organized schedule to get it out in time for Christmas. His storyboarding and character models, not to mention the archives being available for anyone, was able to streamline the animation process efficiently so that everyone not only already knew what the short was going to be, but felt assured it would still have the classic Disney feel. That's not to say there was a lot of pressure, just a little less. As the production was winding down with most of the animation captured on camera, Burny knew that the short still needed one last thing to make it feel like a classic Disney movie: credits. This doesn't seem like a lot, as modern movies have a typical end credits with everyone's name on it. Disney movies up until Fox and the Hound had the old-fashioned method of having the credits in the beginning and a simple the end. Though it undeniably set a great tone before the beginning, it would result in a lot of people associated with the production not getting credit. The idea was first pitched by animator Mark Peraza, who made up a title card image with Jiminy Cricket close to a candlestick. Burny wasn't fully sold. Michael continued to work on more pencil sketches of the characters when fellow animator Vance Gary popped in to see what his friend was working on. The next day, the pencil sketches became ink drawings, like the ones you'd see at the top of a chapter heading in a classic novel. Burny himself eventually came in to see what the two were working on, and finally agreed to let them both draw the title sequence. The production ended on August 19th, where a wrap party was hosted by Ron Miller. Burny and the crew came in with gold-colored t-shirts, commencing the occasion. Disney's marketing played up on the hype that this was the first Mickey Mouse cartoon in 30 years, the triumphant comeback that the crowd had been clamoring for. They hoped it would be enough to get people to go back to the movies, even if it was just for a short and not the main feature. The short would make its premiere in England, where it was released before a reissue of The Jungle Book on October 20th of 1983. In Finland, Denmark, West Germany, and France, the short was re-released in front of a reissue of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in various weeks in November. Mickey's Christmas Carol would be released in the United States on December 16th in front of a re-release of The Rescuers.
Morning, Mr. Scrooge.
Look who's coming for Christmas. All your favorite Disney characters.
Yes, sir.
Yup, that's me. In a merry new featurette.
What's so merry about it?
Mickey's Christmas Carol. Plus,
Do they want us now?
The Rescuers. Walt Disney Productions' free-falling, side-splitting, full-length animated adventure. Mickey's Christmas Carol.
Bail out. Bail out.
And The Rescuers.
Now playing at a theater near you. Check your local listings for details.
A lot of reviews were pretty high. Leonard Maltin would call it cleverly written, well staged, and animated with real spirit and a sense of fun. Other critics would praise it for better animation, having each of the characters in the right parts, and of Alan Young as Scrooge. Some were disappointed that Mickey was not in more of the movie. Some had even thought it needed to be feature length. One set of critics that didn't like it was Siskel and Ebert.
Now, I may be about to commit professional suicide, because how can you knock a movie with a cute little mouse on a cute little crutch? But that's my feeling, because that scene is deceptive. That is not what the whole movie is about. This movie has very few scenes with Mickey Mouse and his wonderful little family in it. This film does not rank with any of the classic Disney animated features. It's missing Mickey, frankly. He and his family are in far too few scenes. At its best, this is only a genial and slightly colorful little stocking stuffer for kids. And I'll be a Scrooge. I give it thumbs down. I was very disappointed.
I can't believe my ears.
Well,
You're going to vote against Mickey's Christmas Carol?
yes.
With Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck? I am too.
Well, of course.
I am too. I was disappointed as well. I'll tell you two reasons that I thought. First of all, It's wall-to-wall with words. They talk for the whole 25 minutes. They don't use the magic of visual animation that Disney people are famous for. And secondly, they don't change the story. This is simply Dickens' Christmas Carol. Goes to Christmas past, present, and future, Bob Cratchit, and so forth, just like in the book. Usually, in the old days of the Disney studio, they would have put an ironic spin on it. There would have been something satirical. They would have had fun with it. It would have been Mickey's version of this story. But instead, it's absolutely a forced march through the same old story.
I would have rather have seen the re-release of two of the old, classic old Mickey Mouse. I'll stand two of those old cartoons up with this. It was, and you know, I went in there with a real good heart. I wanted to love this. I mean, I look forward to it. I wish Disney would make feature-length animated cartoons.
This is a real safe movie. They didn't have that extra little artistic push to make it into something a little bit more than exactly what you were expecting when you walked in through the door. Now let's take another look at the movies we had on this week's program.
It didn't matter, as the movie opened up at 7th place at the box office, behind Sudden Impact, Scarface, Terms of Endearment, and Yentl. What may have hurt it was that, one, The Rescuers was not one of the more popular Disney features. I know there's a lot of people, including myself, who like it, but I can't see a lot of people declaring it as their favorite Disney movie. 2, there had already been an even bigger re-release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that same July. And 3, it had competition from another cartoon that Disney did not expect, the Smurfs. In 1983, because the Smurfs cartoon became a surprise hit, a 1976 Belgian animated movie called The Smurfs and the Magic Flute was given an English dub and released a couple of weeks earlier stateside. Don't take this information of The Rescuers re-release being a failure. It managed to bring in a gross of $10 million, which wasn't bad for the time. More importantly, it got a lot of people talking about Mickey Mouse again, with a lot wondering if more shorts were going to be put in theaters. They would end up having to wait until 1990 for The Prince and the Pauper, which was put in front of a release of The Rescuers Down Under. I can't stress that both these movies are amazing, and I highly recommend those if you're looking for some deep-cut Disney movies that no one's ever heard of. Mickey's Christmas Carol got enough attention that it even received an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Short Film, though it lost to Sunday in New York. It would be the next year, in 1984, in which Mickey's Christmas Carol would make its debut on NBC in an hour-long special in which 3 other classic shorts were shown: Donald's Snow Fight, Pluto's Christmas Tree, and The Art of Skiing starring Goofy, all acting as previews before the main attraction. Michael Peraza was brought in to create 12 more ink title cards to match the opening credits to make the whole hour feel synced in place. It would air until 1990, in which it would alternate between CBS, ABC, the Disney Channel, before finally settling on ABC Family, now known as Freeform, where I still occasionally see it in the 25 Days of Christmas Marathon. It would also get a variety of releases on VHS, Laserdisc, and DVD Blu-ray, which I still own copies of. What happened to Burny Mattinson? He would end up working on his first and only full-length movie as director alongside with Ron Clements and John Musker on Basil of Baker Street, which would later be retitled to The Great Mouse Detective. When Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg would join the company in 1984, the changes they wanted resulted in Burny taking a backseat as producer, leaving Ron and John to directing. Katzenberg apparently didn't like the slower tone that Burny had initially wanted. Burny clearly didn't have a lot of bitterness, as he would stay with the company. It just so happened that he decided to stay in the story department, where starting with Beauty and the Beast, he would work on almost every 90s Disney animated movie, playing a large part in establishing the tones of each project. If you watch Mickey's Christmas Carol and watch Aladdin, The Lion King, and even The Hunchback of Notre Dame, many of them know how to carry a lot of slow scenes, which is impressive when you consider that most of them are not longer than 90 minutes. He was most recently a story artist on Ralph Breaks the Internet. As for Scrooge McDuck, Alan Young would return to the role in DuckTales, which only pushed the character further into the Disney popularity, almost making him a full member of the Fab Five. He would also become a character to meet and greet at the Disney parks. Alan ended up loving the role so much that he continued playing him all the way up to age 96 when he last performed as Scrooge for the Mickey Mouse series that, as of 2021, is still airing on TV, streaming, and YouTube. Though David Tennant and Ann Rydell have played the part fine, Alan will always be the perfect Scrooge. It's funny that despite not having seen the special in a while, I've really come to appreciate it, not just for being a good adaptation of A Christmas Carol, but what it would do for Disney. A lot of people would argue that Who Framed Roger Rabbit or The Little Mermaid would kick off a new renaissance of the company, and of animation in general. I don't disagree with it, but I like to think that Mickey's Christmas Carol had at least planted the seeds for what was to come. The Black Cauldron, the movie that was supposed to be Disney's comeback, would end up bombing and even beaten out by the Care Bears movie on its opening weekend. It would be a while before the movie would gain a cult status. Mickey's Christmas Carol injected a lot of nostalgia for what Disney used to be good at, and showcased that there were still people behind the scenes who knew how to keep the characters going into the next millennium. There's a reason that Mickey's Christmas Carol continued to be aired every year after its release. It bridged the gap between the Disney of the past and the Disney of the future. It also bridges a gap in my history. It brings me back to something that my grandparents and parents liked, and I plan on showcasing it to my children one day. It ties to a world I once knew, and a world I want to see. It'll be a very Merry Christmas, knowing that Mickey's Christmas Carol will continue to bridge those gaps for a lot of people.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.